Well, hello everybody, and welcome to Mitchell Giddings Fine Arts. Thank you for choosing to spend the evening with us as we celebrate spring and art, and especially the photographs of Gene Parulis. And before I go too much further, many of you are familiar with the fact that I like to thank the Vermont Arts Council, with whom we share a link and space on the Vermont Arts Council calendar, Brattleboro Community Television, and Ames Hill Film and Video Productions, Andy Reichsman and Kate Purdy, who film and edit and make available our artist talks and other special events. Beyond the sheer beauty and digital mastery of Gene's photographs, perhaps the most obvious quality he shares is his passion to explore and photograph our diverse world. His journey continues beyond the obvious, however, as he creates a magical, enchanted landscape of imagination or dreams. So I think tonight we should allow Gene Parulis to lead us on one of his journeys to a place we think surely we've been, and perhaps we can feel, in his words, the revitalizing freshness of inspiring places and experiences. Please help me welcome Gene Parulis.
Thank you so much, Jim. I feel really honored to be here, and after words such as those, I feel highly motivated to give to you all of what he promised that I had. So I'd better start because, thank yous are in order. So thank you to Jim and Petey, not just for your wonderful words and your support, but for what you have given to our entire community in having this gallery here. I have been to so many wonderful talks here, so many wonderful events, and I have learned so much just with my fellow artists, and especially through my relationships with Petey and Jim over the years, and with members of Brattleboro West Arts. I see some of them in the audience. I think as I go through the slideshow, I'll be talking about how knowing the work of others was an inspiration for me to try to create something different or something aligned to their work. Or it was a challenge. You know, if Jackie could do this, for example, or if Petey could do this, could I do this with my camera and with Photoshop? So I have to acknowledge that this would not have happened without the community that I'm in. So thank you all. Thank you, audience, for being here. The number of you who have come, you've filled up almost all the chairs. I feel tremendously grateful for having such an attentive, alert, beautiful bunch of people here. I want to thank especially my wife, Fiona Cook. Last July, Fiona and I celebrated our 40th wedding anniversary. I absolutely could not have done this without her. This is a bit of a cliche, but it is completely true. For those of you who have read some of the stuff on my website, for example, I talk about the magic door in the wall that photography opened for me. But when I was reflecting today as I was snowshoeing, that the magic door really opened when I met Fiona. We actually met in Algeria. You're going to see a few pictures of Algeria. This goes back to the 1970s. And I didn't realize at the time that when I came in contact with her, it was going to be a lifetime of magic after that. And it has never stopped being so. So thank you. So let's begin. I hope all of you like slideshows. Yeah, I bet you do. I bet you do. Slideshows are what I do. I've actually created many, thousands in fact, and The slides are going to take us on an interesting journey, and the slides are going to highlight significant transformations in my life, where my work completely changed, or when it became enriched because of a new approach or a new idea. So I'm going to be using them and bouncing my ideas around the slides. In terms of questions, if you have a question that is a really burning question, or if I have said something that is completely confusing and you would like me to paraphrase that or to go deeper into that, please, by all means, ask the question. If there are questions about things like technique or cameras, if you could hold those till later, I would be glad to answer technical questions, but in the slideshow itself, I would rather have, if they're going to be questions, more the philosophical questions, those kind of things. Let's start. This is one of my favorite pictures. It appears on my business card. It is the banner of my website. It was also on a book by a man named Paul Farini years ago. Paul is a writer in the Course for Miracles. And I took this picture in Malaysia. It is about 1982, I believe. And I've always identified with it. The simple lines, a moody sky, a man on a pier who is presumably walking to a boat and getting ready to embark on a journey. That's always been a major theme of mine, is going on a journey. The very first book I wrote was called Words on a Journey. And I'm quoting the poet W.S. Merwin, who has just passed away, with those words. So we'll move on to the next slideshow. So I'm going to be talking about my evolution as a photographer, as a digital artist, and as a thinker in some ways too. But I'm also going to be exploring the mirrorverse. I know that's why many of you came, and all of these pictures are based on the mirrorverse. And this has been the new direction that my photography went in. Perhaps it started 10 years ago, and it really quickened around 2016. And I'll talk about that. A couple of interesting quotes that I'd like to put forth to you. The first actually was supposed to have gone with the first slide, and it is a quote from Marcel Proust, who says that the real journey consists not in seeking new lands, but in seeing with new eyes. Now, of course, I'm also going to new places, and I am personally seeking the visions that only foreign travel, or exotic travel in some cases, can give you. But Marcel Proust's ideas are something that later became more and more important to me, because I did discover that it was the eye itself that was going to be what created the world that you were living in. Leading me to places like this. Another beautiful quotation, I found this in Scotland just a couple months ago when we were there in September, from John Muir. He said, "Between every two trees is a portal." So here is one of those portals. That's what the mirrorverse is about for me. It's entering that new world through the portal. So, this picture was here on display in some of the early days of this gallery, back when it first started. I know it's one of Bill's favorite pictures. I put this picture in here to remind me to tell you that this is the way the slideshow is going to go. It's going to be a spiral. I'm going to be spiraling in and out of a lot of ideas. I've already introduced some of them to you. The idea of the outward discovery, the transformation of vision. But And the Mirrorverse is a world where you really have at least two reflecting parts, as you realize. And in Taoist philosophy, you also have the yin and the yang. You have the dynamic as a result of a dyadic meeting, a dyadic blending. The energy that comes from the joining of two, or from the fruitful connection of the two, is what creates what the Chinese call the 10,000 things, meaning everything. And so for me, when I first did this picture, I call this Winter Vortex, by the way. The original picture was taken about at least 10 years ago. It was around this very same time. I was in the forest and I was looking up at the trees, the bare trees, and the beauty of the bare trees. And so I took a picture of that, and when I brought it back to my Photoshop laboratory, I decided to swirl it, to give it a whirlpool. And this is what I came up with, and it was one of those things that surprised me. This is the joy of digital photography for me, as being absolutely surprised by what the tools will yield, what the new visions are, something that I didn't expect necessarily, or didn't even think could possibly be there. But now I see that there is magic inherent in everything, and I think you will see that this is one of my themes that I will continue to explore. Here's where it starts. I got a camera very early in life. Christmas present at the age of 8. I immediately started taking family pictures. Of course, everybody takes pictures today. So when you say, I got a camera when I was young, that doesn't mean anything anymore. Not the way it did to us. And I see most of you are, you know what I'm talking about. If you were going to be a photographer, somehow you were singled out right away, because you became obsessed with it. It became something you loved to do. I loved documenting my family. I loved going out and documenting the neighbors. These are my grandparents. This, I think, is the first really good picture I ever took. They posed naturally. They're Lithuanian immigrants. I was raised in the very same house where they lived. I was raised in a 3-decker in Worcester, Massachusetts. 3 families on 3 floors, very, very intense, lots of kids. And they were the mainstay. They are the dyad. Here's the 10,000 ideas come out of people such as these. I like to remember that I was like that once. Leaner, hungrier, filled with these incredible joys of meeting new friends. Fiona took this picture in Sumatra in 1981, I think. And wow, the world was more innocent then, too. Yeah, so we'll continue with the Odyssey. This is the way I sometimes feel today, swallowed up in the belly of the great white shark. Reeling, confused from the endless barrage of the news and by all the things that are demanded of us as the world has become ever more complex and demanding. And our digital world, just an endless reeling about. So I'm in the belly of the shark, not the belly of the whale. How do I get out of this? Part of my theme is actually that, how to put myself in a place in which I am not being really literally gobbled up by that world. To go back a little bit into childhood, I've shown you my grandparents. I was from a very, very early age enamored by weirdness, strangeness, bizarreness, dreams, comic books, fantasies, and I'm still there. I have never, ever ceased being in that world. So we'll go on to the next one. I still identify with kids like that. I loved comic books. I still have a big collection of them. the old British Empire really caught my imagination. When I was about 12 years old, I said, I am going to marry a British woman. It's really extraordinary. And it happened. I said, I want to be part of the British Empire. I want to put on a solar topi. I want to go out there and I want to discover things. You know, it's so interesting. Here I am in Brattleboro, no laka. You know, it's the very same world. These are some of my favorite comic books. And I put them here for you because I think these covers are wonderful. So spend a moment just absorbing that. I love the way one is up, you know, so don't go up there, and the other one is, don't take me down there. My comic book collection was in fairly decent shape until my daughter got to it. And which is good, because she read these comics over and over and over again till they are pretty much falling apart at the moment. So not only have these comics transformed me, they also live on in a young woman today too. Just a couple more comics. Notice that here's the exotic promise. I always wanted to dress that way. I still haven't really attained that sartorial elegance yet. And here's me with the camera. And yeah, it's the ghostly hand. I'm always looking for those ghostly hands. You'll see that there's a few pictures that speak to that coming up. What interested me too is the idea of mirrors I found in some of my early comic books. I always remembered that my favorite Flash villain was the Mirror Master. Did any of you read The Flash back in the 60s? Oh, Andy, okay, great. Flash is big again, and a lot of these comic books are, you know, we've seen actually too much of the superheroes lately. But for me, they were very important, but I loved the villains. They all had these wonderful costumes. They all were masters of science, masters of ingenuity. You know, the Mirror Master had mirrors everywhere, and he had special mirrors. He could take your soul with a mirror. He could use a mirror to break through the hardest mineral. He could saw through his prison bars with mirrors. And so here we have mirrors, and here we have the transformation of Batman. So is it any wonder that I eventually got into this stuff? The seeds were planted pretty early, as you can see. And it's really mysterious as to how we evolve our art. And sometimes we like to think that it comes from maybe reading some grand statement by Hegel. But no, it probably goes back to this kind of confrontation. I'm going to be talking about pictures that were really important to me. Pictures where, when I saw them, changed my direction as a photographer or changed the ways I thought of the world. This picture was taken in Pagan, in the country that was known at that time as Burma. And Fiona and I were lucky enough to travel there twice in the 1980s, including once for an entire month. And we spent 1 week in Pagan on our second visit. There were no hot air balloons in those days. There were no tour buses. It was a kind of a forgotten, difficult country. And we were sitting on top of a pagoda. And here was a man on the lonely footpath. And again, you're seeing here on a vertical dimension what I showed you in the very first picture, which the man on the pier. So this image has always captivated me, that solitary soul walking the path. Here we have a path, again, the path into the mountains, the path beckoning to you. I became a long-distance walker in the late 70s, and it became my mission to walk as many great footpaths of the world as possible. Fiona and I spent 6 months in the Himalayas in the 80s. I was endlessly going to Europe to follow some of the pilgrimage trails. and some of those wonderful walks in which you tour an entire mountain massif. This is in the Tour de Queyras in France. This is getting closer to home. This is South Pond, just last September. Early on, I was influenced by a photographer who was actually my brother's engineering teacher at Worcester Polytechnic Institute. He was a British guy who was a scientist and an engineer, but his great passion in life was photography. And he had a wonderful Hasselblad. He went out with his tripod. His great role models were Ansel Adams, Minor White. He would go and he would photograph roots and trees and rocks. And he invited me to come with him, and we became good friends after that. And he taught me a lot about just appreciating that which is common. And I think, though roots and rocks might be dismissed as subject matter by a lot of people today, to me they still are grounding, important influences. So I see that still in South Pond. This was taken in Marlborough a couple years ago. This is the solemnity of November. Okay, so the next picture is pretty much the opposite in terms of crazy color. And this was taken just last September, and it's a garden path. Instead of that lonely path into the bleak, dark woods, this was a path filled with light and fragrances and color. This is one of the things I love most about traveling in Britain, is the phenomenal gardens. I expect that some of you have seen some of these. If you haven't, put this at the top of your list. This is Cranbourne Manor, open only one day a week, only for a couple months of the year. It's in Dorset, so if any of you are fans of Thomas Hardy, you can combine both of these. Two of the books that I have the privilege to work on with people, I guess they're not in the audience right now. The Meditative Gardener by Cheryl Wilfong, and Teaching as a Spiritual Practice by Lauren Aldifer. Notice that both of them have paths. And so one of them is a garden path that Cheryl chose as her cover, and the other Lauren chose from the Queyras, as you can see. So it's the idea of being on the path, the importance of actually having a path. Because for many people, there is no path. And those of us who have a path are very, very fortunate. Also, I've been thinking too, the path is also that kind of place where the dyads meet. There's the magic axis right there. This is the first picture I think that I took outside of like family pictures that made me realize I was doing something that I didn't know I could do. Capturing the feel of a place and capturing maybe the social troubles that were going on there too. This is taken in the Kasbah in Algeria in 1975. So it's an old slide that was scanned, so it doesn't have the resolution of digital equipment today. But it's that enclosed world. Here's a boy who seems to be rather disturbed by something. Wasn't even aware that I was there. Completely involuted in his own world of whatever suffering he was going through, rejection or whatnot. And so this picture of in the Kasbah has always been with me as a eye-opening, revealing picture. I fell under the influence of the great French photographer Henri Cartier-Bresson, who probably many of you know of. And the phrase that he is most associated with is the decisive moment. He said a good photograph, a great photograph, has to have the decisive moment. It's when everything is in balance. Is when you have the composition in which light and dark, all the dynamism and the tension between forms, typically illuminated by, in his eyes, some kind of human content as well, conveying an important breakthrough in a narrative that was going on. And I thought, well, you know, the decisive moment is something I need to be looking for. And I think as I was traveling, especially in places like India, the decisive moment was there so frequently. I became almost tired out as a photographer being able to capture it. But, you know, this is one of the pictures that absolutely works for me. The relationship of the boy, the cow, that it was illuminated, the people up above who are looking at me probably. And it's the mystery of India, all of that together. I think the decisive moment is also something that you can get in nature. So it's not just people coming together in a certain way. I think especially with the probing beauty, the mystery of light, as light penetrates and illuminates and opens up to us the mysterious, that's also the decisive moment. This picture took place in Kenwood on Hampstead Heath, a few days before Christmas, a very, very cold, beautiful frost, and then the light penetrating. So the next picture, too, also is the mystery of light. I put this in specifically to give us hope because, you know, this is what it's going to be like in just a couple months. Yeah, this was actually in my backyard. This is why I love living in Vermont. I love the 4 seasons. I love the complete change. I love the fact that you cannot truly get tired of things. You know, if winter is too cold and too long and summer is too buggy and too hot, think of the other season or think of those beautiful transition seasons. And wow, the miracle is there. And so being able to capture these mysteries of light, I'm always on the lookout for that. That's the decisive moment for me. And the next picture, you'll see the same. I was in the Transylvanian Alps in October 2017, and I had been, this was getting late in the month that I spent in Romania. I became very interested in that country after reading a book by Robert Kaplan, and wanted to see exactly what was happening there. A lot of the pictures I was pleased with, but after 3 weeks of being on the road and hiking and walking, there wasn't any picture that to me was astonishing yet. You know, they were good pictures, they were decent pictures, they were illuminating things. This was the moment. Here I was, and I had my long lens, and I'm on a hiking trail, and the moody clouds, a little bit of snow, a little bit of rain, and finally the probing, magnificent light. I love reflections. The whole idea of the other image. There again, we have the mirror image at play. What is in a reflection? I'm the kind of person who could stand by a pond for an hour and just look at the way the water is changing everything else. I get captivated by this. This was taken in Woodstock, Vermont, in a pond that Fiona and I were sitting and having lunch by, and it was a mesmerizing experience. We were looking at this pond for at least an hour, and it was becoming, every architecture that we knew was in there. Another one of my favorite reflections, one of the things I always feel really gratified to hear from people is when they say, your picture is like, and they say the name of someone that I admire. And so this picture has often been compared to Claude Monet. Claude Monet is absolutely one of my favorite painters. He had the kind of a life that, in many ways, when I was younger, I said, I want a life like that. I want to have a backyard in which I create my own world. I want to be able to use my own forest in my own path system and Fiona's garden to be able to capture these states that I'm feeling as vitally important. And it's come to be. It's another one of those great miracles for which I am eternally grateful. This is close by. This is Harvard Pond in Petersham, Massachusetts. I often go to the Barry Center for Buddhist Studies or to Insight Meditation Society. Barry and Harvard Pond is on the way. I always stop there. Sometimes I walk, take the trails for hours before I get to BCBS or IMS. So it has had lots of magic for me. One of my favorite pictures, this was on exhibition here. I took this in bleak, bleak, bleak Beijing November, when Beijing gets into that really gritty hyper-pollution where there is no light practically, but still there is much beauty. I was in Beihai Park, which is not far from the Forbidden City, and there is an island in the middle of the park, and all around the island are lotus ponds, lotuses. And when lotuses die back, they become like this. I had never seen this before, never. And when I looked, to me, it brought up an artist who, again, is one of my favorite artists, Miro. I saw all these funny type of playful Miro characters, and here and throughout there. And so I stood on the banks of this lotus pond. I was absolutely enthralled and filled with great pleasure, thinking, thank you. You know, Miro is here, and I'm able to capture this. So again, you see some of the elements that I play with. I am very, very, very influenced by painters. Because I've been very fortunate to go to Europe a lot of times, and I've spent a lot of time in museums. And so the great works of the Impressionists, the Dutch, the Surrealists, Picasso, Miro, Kandinsky, those people are deeply, deeply, deeply embedded in my mind, just as deeply as the comic books are. And so when I take a picture, or when I'm in a place, or when I'm reviewing my portfolio, the archives of what I've taken, I'm often thinking, can I render this picture in a way that Monet did, or Pissarro did, or Rembrandt? And it becomes a challenge to me. How can I do that? How can I go beyond the realist in photography and get to that other dimension that the painters are so adept at bringing out? This was a breakthrough picture for me. And again, it illuminates one of my missions in a way. This was in London, I think 2007. We were very fortunate to go to London many, many times, particularly at Christmas. Our child was Fiona's parents' only grandchild, and so it was just the perfect thing to do to spend Christmas there. And so I would have endless amount of time to wander London, you know, probably 15 years worth of just wandering the streets there. Every Christmas, the Golden Carousel appears for about 3 weeks. And it's one of these magical moments. This was a profoundly gloomy day. It was as bad as Beijing in the winter. Not as polluted, thankfully, but it was just so deeply overcast. And you would think, there is no possibility of a redeeming photograph here. Aha! See, that has become one of the things that I've decided to do. How can I show people that even on the gloomiest day, you can still find something that you can use, that there is still something there? And again, this brings us back to Marcel Proust's statement about seeing with new eyes. And of course, I'm playing with the idea here that the vitality of childhood, the magic of the color that we all unfortunately have to leave behind at some stage and enter into the gray world. But I'm also offering the hope that we can reclaim it. And certainly that is one of the things that art does. And for all of those of us, and there are several in this audience, who are artists, you know that that's what it gives us. We can go back and we can have that wonderful, childlike way of perceiving the world again. I was very, very, very fortunate, and this is thanks to my daughter, to be given a month-long art fellowship in China in 2014. And so we spent the entire month under the Great Wall of China in a village called Mutianyu. We had a beautiful house. We had food provided for us. It was just, it's like such an ideal state, the like of which I have never experienced and have never experienced again. It was just too perfect. So every day we just went out and explored. Everything changed for me with having a complete month to do nothing except to be an artist. This is what's called the Wild Wall. Most of the wall that is the Ming Wall, and of course the Ming Wall is only a portion of the entire extent of the wall. Most of the Ming Wall is like this, it's overgrown. And it's spectacularly amazing as an experience to be in a place in which there aren't any crowds. And so people go, they flock to Mutianyu by the tens of thousands to go to the cleaned up portion of the wall. But there's footpaths everywhere, and the footpaths will take you to this kind of stuff. So. This is a picture that has been often displayed here. I think it was the first picture that I had in the gallery that people were really saying, wow, and stopping. And I was so amazed and again, gratified by what people were saying to me. This goes back to that very same area, Mutianyu in China. And this was a couple years before the fellowship. I was traveling with my daughter. We stopped at a Buddhist temple. And I photographed marigolds that were in a bowl that were offered to the Bodhisattva Guanyin, who is the Bodhisattva of compassion. She's like the Virgin Mary in Chinese mythological, compassionate way of thinking. So what I started playing with, abstracting the marigolds, and then trying out all these new techniques that I had never played with before, until I got to this place where I said, yes, indeed, it's Klimt, And of course, everybody says that, but that's what I felt myself. And I said, stop playing around, you've got it. And so when I showed people this picture, of course, it was one of the transformative experiences for me as an artist, and also for people started taking my own photography a little bit more seriously when I could do this. Part of my mission is to transform, as I said, to take something that is maybe not something you would think is even photogenic, and to do something with it. This is a statue, a sculpture, at the entrance to Mutianyu, where we spent that month. Everybody hated it. Everybody said that is an ugly, horrible work that needs to be destroyed. And I said, okay, I'm going to see if I can do something with it. I am going to make it beautiful. Is it possible? So I tried. You be the judge of that.
That's the same picture?
No. It's a lot of it. I walked around that statue. I took multiple pictures, and then I fused them. And I moved them, I shifted them. I had lots of layers in Photoshop, and some I changed, some I raised, some I lowered. And then I had different blending modes. We can get into this later if some of you are interested. This is one of the things I was doing on that Arts Foundation Fellowship for that month. I really got to know Photoshop extremely well because I sat there and experimented with it. I had the time to do it. And I've always loved German expressionists. And I wanted to create that dynamic that people like Franz Marc, one of my idols as a painter, I wanted to see if I could do that. So I don't know if I have, but that's what I set out to do. You may recognize what this later became. This was a really deeply drab day, but I knew that it had the outlines of what I wanted, so I didn't give up. So we'll go on to the next picture. This is one of the pictures that people love best in all of the pictures I've ever done. It's been on display in this gallery. This again comes from that time in China, the endless ridges. I've always loved a Russian painter named Nicholas Roerich. I don't know if any of you know of his work. Very mystical painter, lived in the early part of the 20th century. A great traveler, traveled all over the Himalayas. And he often did these fantastic colorizations of mountain ridges. And I said, can I do a Nicholas Roerich? And there it is. I have been playing with blurs and trying to convey motion for a long, long time. Again, futurists were into this kind of thing. I was always fascinated by this. You know, when you're in big cities, you know, London, New York, Shanghai, those places, it's so dynamic with the lights. How do you capture it? You know, you just don't do a freeze frame. And so, I love the idea of the calligraphy, the signatures of light. And I love the idea of being able to engage with a photograph and actually paint it by moving around myself. So I am moving as I'm taking this picture. This is a long exposure, maybe 20 seconds, but I am doing things like this. And these are the lights of that spectacular display of crazy, wild energy architecture called Pudong in Shanghai. Any of you have been there, you'll know how I feel. It's probably the most extraordinary cityscape in the entire world, especially at night. You know, hundreds and hundreds of skyscrapers, all lit up in different colors. Here's another part of China. This has been on display in this gallery too. So I still do a lot of realism. I'm just not involved in saturations and in trying to be a painter. I'm also firmly in the realist school, looking at that decisive moment. I was invited to Guangzhou by an anthropologist to take pictures for his research. And I was in a section of the city called Xiaobei, which to me really recalled the Kasbah. Very narrow, very, very intense. People just living everywhere, sprawling signs and crazy wires. And what I love about this picture, you know, it has that narrow medieval lane, but it's the 21st century. It's connected to the world, you know, very precariously, obviously. But here at the very bottom is this sweeper. This, to me, it just said it all. You know, there is a decisive moment. She is cleaning up, you know. Again, this goes to my mission about seeing if I could take what is forgotten, what is a piece of scrap, and making something beautiful. I took this last May it was behind a warehouse in Rockland, Maine. And so it was just stuff that was thrown into a dumpster. And I said, what can I do with this? The next picture shows you. I created this mandala. I started to get into mandalas or mandalas, however you wish to pronounce it, only recently. I knew that if you took a mirror and you mirrored the mirror, in the center you would get a mandala. But was there another way to do mandalas? And suddenly I had the breakthrough of using a mirrored axis and then to have multiple fusings along a cruciform direction, you know, or, you know, with 45s and 90s over 30s and 60s are all the different things. And so I created this out of that scrap heap. Isn't that astonishing? You know, I was blown away by this. And again, I'm always looking for this in my own work. If I can be surprised by it, then I know it's working. I've gone on to create these kind of mandalas just in the last couple months. So, you know, this one here I really love. This was one of these ladders into a Kiva in New Mexico. This actually began in a greenhouse in Hungary. This was ice formations in my backyard. This one was This was in just this last time in Spain, Segovia. This was on top of Putney Mountain. Here's a picture I know a lot of you know already. Again, this was a breakthrough moment for me. I took this in 2011. It was the 7th time that I had led Landmark's Summer Abroad to Greece program. And we were in Nemea, one of the great places of the world for mythology. It's where the first labor of Heracles took place. Also, they had their own Olympic-style games there. It's also known for wine and for olive groves. I took this picture. I knew the picture was right, but the colors were initially wrong. And here is where I started to experiment with something that has really yielded a lot for me, which was doing impressionist techniques. So I'm thinking of Monet, Pissarro, Renoir when I'm doing this. And so I'm selectively sharpening and pulling things out of focus at the same time. So that's what's creating that, and deepening colors, obviously. So a breakthrough picture for me. A picture too, this was taken probably on the very same day. I call this Poppies for Persephone. So I'm thinking of the magical light of Persephone being lured into the poppy ground, not knowing that the darkness is here. Here's the darkness of the abyss of Hades. So when I'm looking at pictures, I'm reading a lot of things into them. And especially if you're teaching mythology or Greek history and you're in Greece, your mind is open to all these possibilities, and I'm trying to illustrate some of these things. Okay, now we get to the real mirrorverse per se. This is the first mirror picture I ever took. I was in a wonderful place in England called Purton Green. You'll see a picture of that coming up. I had a tripod, and I took a picture of myself because people had been asking for a picture. I didn't like any of the pictures of myself, and so I thought, well, I'm a Gemini. And so why not illustrate my Gemini nature by flipping it and widening the canvas, and it was the first mirror. So, and I abhor things like selfies. I don't like taking pictures of myself. I really usually don't like people taking pictures of me. I'm fine with, sometimes with people taking pictures of me. But that's not my thing, is that type of world. So I was reluctant. That's where it took place. Landmark Trust property, one of my favorites of all time, Purton Green in Suffolk. In 2012, I was in Spain. I spent a week in Barcelona, and then I did the Salvador Dali pilgrimage to Cadaqués and to Figueres, and then to the castle. I don't remember where it is, where Gala, he gave the castle to his wife Gala. So here is Dali. These are the rocks right outside the house that he lived on in Cadaqués. And so I took the portrait of Dali from inside the house and I fused it with the rocks so that Dali is emerging. And so Dali started really getting into me in 2012 because I saw hundreds and hundreds of his pictures. This was the second mirror picture that I did. This was influenced by Dali. Also influenced by metaphysical painters. And I wanted the loneliness of the towers, the clock that's used by people like De Chirico, for example. I'm consciously putting this together. I didn't really know what I was doing when I did this. And so when you flip and you fuse, which is the way you do the essence of the mirror, sometimes it's just rubbish, but sometimes it's astonishing. And so here is one of the times it's like, whoa. I decided that I wanted to see if I could play with some of ideas that Escher played with. This was in Greece, and this was a Greek alley cat, and so I decided to see what I could do with it. This is an interesting fact. Escher and I share the same birthday. Yeah. Isn't that amazing? So we're both Geminis. The mirrorverse is a natural, I guess. In Greece, too, this is the first time I tried mirrors on rock formations. I was in Meteora, and when I saw this, I said, this is interesting. What else can I do with this? And so when I went back to Arizona last year, after a long absence from that beautiful, beautiful state, this is one of the things I created with the spectacular red rock of Arizona. My friend Bill saw this picture in December, and Bill is a true explorer of the mirrorverse, and he is aware of the fact that along the magical seam, and I talk about that in my artist statement, that's where there is a birth, a new birth of creatures that none of us have seen before, and sometimes hundreds. In some of my pictures, Bill has actually he's seen more than 100 figures. So thank you, Bill.
You're welcome.
This is in New Mexico. They're really there, you know. They are. You know, don't you feel that? You know, when you walk or when you're in astonishingly beautiful places, you know that there are devas. You know that there are spirits there. We can't see them necessarily, but you intuit them, or you feel that they're there. And the mirror stuff that I've been doing is a way of at least conjuring that, some possibility. This is the very first mirror I did in China. This is the famous West Lake in Hangzhou. And when I got the magical tree suspended here, of course I was seeing Buddhas and many other things. I call this Sukhavati, which is the Western heaven in Mahayana Buddhism, Chinese Mahayana Buddhism, and this is West Lake, so I thought that worked together. I started playing with triptychs. So with a mirror, you don't have to stop with just 2 sections. You can go on. And so triptychs really open up some fascinating things. This is a triptych, for example. And what's fascinating about a triptych is you're not centered. You know, when you have a diptych, you go right to the center. You know, the eye is just focused there. And perhaps you can weary of that after a while. If you start introducing a triptych or a quadritych or, you know, pentatych and all these other things, the eye has to move around. So it will explore the picture in a different way. And, you know, these are the kind of landscapes where I would love to actually walk in. So I'm doing this for the sake of my own dreams. I want to be on this bridge. This whole idea of changing colors radically, creating very, very ethereal other worlds, this was created during that month that I had in China. It's up in the window, you probably noticed. Tree with blue fruit. It's kind of moved around this town. It's been at the music center. It's been all throughout this gallery. So I owe this to China. These for those of you curious, it's actually in a persimmons orchard. But again, in my mythological way of thinking, these are Persephone's kind of fruits here. Fiona loves this picture, so I put it in. This was taken in New Hampshire. Welcome Hill. Hey, this is coming only in a month. You know, this when the magnolias start to flower and all the daffodils are there. You know, we'll see each other there next month. And so I'm moving. I'm jumping up and down to get to this part. That's so like this. You can see the way my camera's moving. So play with that if you're really interested in it. And so when I had it right, then of course I created the mirror to create that embrace. 2016, really pivotal year for me. I flew from England, where we had Christmas, to visit some old friends. In fact, our best man and his wife, who had just retired and who were teaching at a private school in Trieste. And so while in Trieste, where James Joyce lived for a number of years, Joyce was a good friend of the writer, the Italian modernist writer called Italo Svevo. This is a statue that commemorates Svevo. Svevo talked about things like mirror universes and reflections. And so I decided to just play with that aspect. And so this is Svevo meets Svevo. Everything exploded in 2016 because of Venice, Trieste, and the Dalmatian coast. As you can see, half of these pictures come from that trip. This is something Svevo talked about. What if you were on an island and you couldn't really get off of it, and you kept on encountering the same people and yourself, always? So again, you know, this what if of the mirror universe, it's really something, it's a paradox that you can play with. And this was really fun to create these type of unreal but beautiful places. Trieste. This is the first Ent picture I created. Again, it was the same year. We had been to Powys Castle in Wales, one of these tremendously beautiful, evocative British trees that are Entish beings in and of themselves. And so the technique that I first used here is you have a beautiful tree. You split the tree down the middle. You know, you don't take it that way. You take the full tree. You see where you can cut the tree. You can't always do it. It doesn't always work. So you bisect it, and then you see what happens. And this one is the first one that I said, hey, I better play with this a little bit more. And so this is my Ent series. And oh, do I love this tree. Petey Mitchell knows this tree. I introduced her to it. I bet Claire and Jack probably even know where this is. This is an old, old, old tree that's on Insight Meditation Society property in Barrie. I know a lot of yogis have passed by this. It's a little bit off the main trail, but you can see it from the main trail. When I split this down and created, and the Dragon Mother Ent appeared, I said, thank you, thank you. She's friendly. I love this creature. This is here. This is Brattleboro. No, Dummerston, I guess. This was on the Manitou property, way down in that mysterious section where you always get lost, where the footpath suddenly disappears, and the trees really do start to talk. One of my favorite pictures begins in England. And again, here's where I'm mirroring, and then I'm mirroring the mirror. When you mirror the mirror, you enter the world of the mandala. When you enter that world, you are really in somewhere else. And here is where they beautifully frame themselves often. And I began to see quantum physics and things like this, Einsteinian worlds. You notice I play with colors a lot. These did not work with the natural colors for me. In fact, most people, yeah, you would have said, oh, cool, but that would be it. I think the colors, and I think this is what you see in Sanctuary. I use some of the similar palette in here. It says to me spirituality for some reason, this palette. English trees. I became very fascinated by Celtic design, the way it intertwines and it just leads and it loops back and it's so complex. And I wanted to see if I could do something Celtic. And so I took one of these giant old 400-year-old trees or so on the Shugborough estate, and I just played with it, and that's what came. England again. England is tremendously beautiful for trees. I mean, I know they've cut their forest back, but wow, the trees that remain, they're powerful. This is Anglesey Abbey, and so I made, out of a stand of poplars, I made an island. I was very influenced by that great German painter, Berkelin, I think his name is, The Island of the Dead. I always loved that picture, the soul being ferried across. And I wanted to create an island of my own, so here's that. So here is, again, British trees. This is on Watership Down, the famous Watership Down, giant trees at the top. And so winter, again, bare, and again, creating the mandala out of that. What I love, too, is magical figures that just appear, figures that fill you with happiness. So here's a garden figure speaking welcome. A lot of people are drawn to the Mirrorverse by garden pictures. I've often met other photographers who have said, check out this, and they show me their mirror pictures. And I say 90% of the time they are taken in people's gardens. And when you do the mirror stuff, that's when it starts to come alive to people. So it's quite a lot of fun when you can actually get into that. So here I'm raking leaves one day, left the pile. It was one of the first frosts of November. So I just started taking pictures of the beautiful frost. And when I made a mirror out of this one, again, it was one of these moments that's like, wow, the being reveals itself. Which way do you choose? I always love that, that dilemma. One of my favorite pictures, that's been on display here, but it's still somewhere in the back. I call it Orinoco. And all the joy of the discovery of a jungle with new species and beings emerging in colors. The idea of bringing shamanism or a shamanic insight to photography, that's something I set out to do at one stage. I was talking to a teacher who is also a scholar of Taoism and the intersection of Taoism and Buddhism. And I said to him, when you go to art, what are you looking for? And he said, I'm looking for the shamanic. He said, I want to see visions that the shamans have. And I said, yeah, okay, can I do this? So that became an assignment to myself. This is called Shaman's Pool. It begins in the Bistai Dana Zen wilderness of New Mexico. I was influenced by Carlos Castaneda, as you probably can tell. You remember him? Yeah. The next picture is called Portal to Ixtlan, and it's dedicated to Don Juan and Carlos Castaneda. I love this, If those of you who have hiked or traveled in the Southwest, New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, Colorado, the Four Corners, you often get to these places where the rocks look like brains, and you can enter into the fissures of the brains, and they, even without being mirrored, they're weird. So what if you take something that is weird and make it even weirder? That's the shamanic. I love clouds, of course. And I fused images here of the clouds and the waves. And I like this idea of, on the first day, on the second day, God created. And so this is that great figure of creative energy that clouds and waves actually bring forth to us. Can any of you recognize this? The core image? Do any of you know where this is? It's close by.
Oh, it's not Gaston Pond.
No. Any guesses?
Connecticut River.
No, good try. It's not a river. It's actually a pond.
Is it Sunset Lake?
No. It's Weatherhead Hollow Pond. It was a couple years ago. It was just that perfect day. And then that's what happened to it. It becomes even more perfect. I love sheep. I love British sheep. I've walked through so many footpaths with sheep dancing around. When we had our little daughter, she would, that was the greatest joy in life. So it's kind of in honor of her, this picture. I will not comment on this. This is my final picture. May you have some joy. May it perk you up.